There once was a girl who was trapped in the dark, with naught but her shadow for company. A journey to escape she did embark, and her shadow followed distrustfully.
Shady Part of Me is an indie puzzle game made by Focus Home Interactive that tells the story of a little girl and her shadow in search of an exit, overcoming puzzles in themselves to do so. But the true meaning behind the game goes much deeper than that. The very atmosphere of the game shows you the inner machinations of the little girl's mindscape as she struggles with her fears and moves past them, guided only by her shadow, who encourages her to keep going and helps her progress past many of the puzzles. Throughout the game, you notice that everything is telling you the same story. The background shifts and distorts based on the current mental state of the girl. Puzzles in each new section alter their solutions to match the current dynamic of the two characters you play as. The little girl and her shadow also progress as characters during the entire ordeal. As you solve puzzles, you gain insight as to what these characters want and the different personalities they all have. I hope by the end of this, you too gain insight as to how I have viewed these characters, as well as the game as its whole. This is... The two characters, who are simply called the Girl and Shadow, play a vital role in the psyche of the girl herself, with the shadow serving as her subconscious thoughts, following behind trying to guide the girl in the right direction. The girl serves as her conscious self, advancing through the many stages of her mind, which I will refer to as her mindscape. This mindscape is first shown to the player as a tree with an extended branch holding a swing set, an important visual that will show up later in the game. The prologue, as well as the first chapter of the game, serve as a baseline. The prologue explains the skeletal structure of the larger meaning of the game through messages and conversations the two characters have. In the beginning, the shadow says, "I liked it better when I was on the swing, with someone to push me," and "I liked it better when I was alone on the ground, with no one to push me," telling you right off the bat that this girl is alone. And seeing how similar the sentences are structured, you can gather that these positive and negative events are mixed together in her mind, ruining any positive memories she has with others. As she progresses through a shadowed woodland of brambles, she notes that they said many things about her and that she thinks that they were right, a sign that she doesn't view herself in any positive regard deep down, which potentially plays into the girl's fear of the light. The shadow ultimately gets chased down by warped brambles, a symbol of her negative emotions taking control. And the shadow mentions that she was pushed forward by fear, of them, of me, of us. Further cementing the fact that sometime in the past she was bullied or picked on by others, which in turn led her to shun social contact and hide in the darkness. It is at this point that we are introduced to the girl, as she wakes up from what seems to have been a bad dream. We see that her room is very small and isolated from the many others scattered throughout the building. There is a nameplate at the foot of her bed, hinting at the fact that she may be an orphan, a theory that is supported by the house she explores through her prologue. She remarks,
"Back then I had to hide in the shadows, where nobody could see me. The light was dangerous."
She viewed the light as dangerous because of the people that inhabited it. She was so traumatized by that past event that the very thought of being in direct light fills her with paralyzing fear. As she views out the yard of this building, she continues to stick to the shadows, even avoiding artificial light from lamps. The girl says, "It's too bright outside. I'd rather stay in the shadows." It is at this moment where she loses control on her mindscape. She becomes enveloped by negative thoughts, similar to the shadows section, but instead of the background lashing out at her physically, it becomes distorted and strange. Floors lose foundation, statue busts begin to turn and follow her every movement in cold, judging eyes. In order for her to escape the harshness of reality, she's forced herself into hiding from people and escaping into her fantasy. In this corrupted view of the building, both the girl and the shadow speak in unison.
They were waiting. They were looking. They were probably judging all the time.
And begin to quote the very things that the people had called her.
How innocent, naive, limited, stubborn. And very, 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 very alone.
These aren't words children would use, they're words adults would use. The adults and children in the girl's life didn't understand the problems she was undergoing, which pushed her away from all of them as she limited herself from them, making the distance between her and reality even greater than self-isolation. The world the girl lived in was one no one else can comprehend, a cage of her own design. The only way to escape something like that is to do so voluntarily. This brings us to the reunion of the Shadow and Girl. As the two progress through the stage together, you can see their personalities manifest. The Shadow is confident in her abilities and has a goal in mind, to reach the exit and get out of the mindscape. Yet the Shadow willingly chooses to follow the girl on her escapades, stating that,
As long as I follow, maybe I'll be okay.
the girl is shown to be quite excited to finally have a friend, and whisks the Shadow along into her fantasy world, quickly dismissing any doubts the Shadow has about the realism of the mindscape, claiming, "Books tell prettier stories. I choose to trust books." And, "In dreams, the sky's the limit." Having met this resistance from her newfound friend, you see the world begin to distort again, misshaping the proportions of the orphanage and escaping into the depths of her imagination, a common coping mechanism for avoiding trauma in the form of dissociation. Diving deeper into her imagined world whenever she faces any slight aversion to her way of life. Shadow knows this and seems to instead follow along with the girl, offering advice and assistance in order to help them both escape, acting as a guide for her while letting her make the decisions. Similar to how therapists let the clients guide the sessions in order to get better. As the girl dissociates into her imagination, the stage tells a deeper story. The toys scattered around are grown into larger proportions than normal. Deadly bramble thrives on the silhouette of the toys, symbolizing the negative thoughts slowly creeping into the girl's mind. All the wooden people in this stage willingly do anything the girl tells them to, representing the world she chooses to live in, one where no one opposes her. Even the Shadow believes that, in this place, she feels dependent on the actions of the girl. Throughout this stage, you see the thoughts of the Shadow on the walls. She is confused about this place. It feels familiar, yet also distant. It feels similar, yet also absent. Is this place really what it seems? All these things look different. Has this place changed? The Shadow knows that this world is not what it appears to be. Your world is treacherous, unsteady, easier than perceived. As the girl moves to continue deeper into her imagination, the world begins to fall away. The childish theme of stars and clouds give way to office-like waiting rooms, inattentive wooden people, and cold, tiled flooring. As the two navigate their way through the stage, you see the shift in power over the puzzles compared to the previous stage. In the imagination, the girl was unburdened by obstacles, and was helping the Shadow move forward. But here, you can see that the girl faces obstacles while trying to maintain that leadership over the Shadow. Personalities have also changed. The Shadow finds solace in how orderly and defined everything is, whereas the girl has lost her childlike whimsy and replaced it with a sense of unease. She's no longer confident in the location of the exit, and this is manifested in the mindscape as the two venture through an M.C. Escher painting, a labyrinth of winding stairs in all sorts of dimensions, with arrows pointing to the exit in all directions. It is only after this labyrinth that you meet the disembodied voice of the therapist, an outside voice diving into the troubled mind of this girl and trying to guide her out of her own mind. His personality is harsher than the shadows when guiding the girl through her problems, often coming out as commands rather than assistance. This plays a vital role in the later parts of the story and in the mentality of the two characters you play as. The girl wakes up from a nightmare to realize that she isn't in the room she had in the orphanage, rather in a padded cell in an asylum. Her attempt to find the exit in her mind had failed due to the inability to face her fears, and she became even worse than she had been originally. She blames herself for this failure. This is shown through the world as padded walls are cracked in places, and unkempt foliage shadows the walls, giving the stage a jungle feeling as opposed to the previous forested stages in the prologue. This is more dangerous and unregulated than the woods. The puzzles have gotten shifted in the favor of the shadow, who now impacts the girl's world via eyes that activate only in darkness, forcing the shadow to pave the way for the girl instead of the other way around like it has been up to this point. As the girl tries to escape this section, she encounters a message. What do we do when the lights go dark? Where do we go when the shadows grow? How do we wake up from the bad dreams? Why do we stay here when we could just leave? This shows that the fear is once again trickling in just behind the scenes of the mindscape. Sewer pipes with bars on them litter the walls and symbolize the cage of fear she's trapped in. The shadow begins to question if the girl is really sure she knows where she's going and is taking her to the exit, which is a metaphor for the girl not trusting herself to do anything right. The therapist responds to these accusations by saying that
you won't find the exit if you don't face your fears. It seems you're afraid of light. What does it mean to you? Have you tried walking in the sun? Isn't a fireplace soothing? Don't you need a nightlight to guide you in your dreams?
These questions aggravate the girl, who lashes back, saying that she doesn't want to be here and wants to go home. Yet the words resonate with something inside of her, as the mindscape shifts to show what these lights mean to the characters and how they struggle and overcome them. As the girl and her shadow journey onward through the sand-filled temple, you can see the paranoia of the girl's fear rising. She begins to fret over people in the light watching her, a feeling the game shows all too well in this stage. Wooden people darting behind pillars to stalk and follow your movements. The shadow, however, does not see any of these things, because subconsciously the girl knows there isn't really anything there. In this panic-stricken state, the shadow once again takes the lead in solving puzzles, clearing the path for the girl to worriedly progress. The puzzles themselves feature more light than in the previous stages, and thinner shadows for the girl to cross, emphasizing the role shadow has in this stage. During one of the conversations between the girl and the shadow, there is a message. Those she fears made me grow, hiding all in the shadow. This hints at the purpose of the shadow. As the girl's fear of light kept growing and distancing her from people, subconsciously she knew she needed guidance, yet was too stubborn to accept it from others, thereby creating this shadow self to be the opposite of her, capable of walking in the light and confident in her abilities, to help her reach her own goal of escaping this illusion she's trapped herself in. This entire section is to show just how crippling the girl's fear is, and how insurmountable her fear feels to overcome it, even going as far as saying that the way they watch burns, it hurts, when asked if these people in the light may mean well. After sinking through the sand, the two characters come across a furnace of some sort, where burning fuel casts fragile shadows on the walls. I see the weakness, so acutely, so sadly. It condemns the past and praises the future. This message appears on the wall at the beginning of the section, and is a precursor of what this stage tells of the characters. The characters themselves undergo a complete reversal in terms of personality. The girl is more comfortable in the low light and prominent shadows, a parallel to the shadow's experience, who feels unsteady and wavering in the dimly lit area. The whole zone symbolizes what could happen if the girl never improves from her fear, and instead stays in the darkness. Her subconscious guide in the shadow would disappear because she no longer subconsciously wishes to leave. To which she says, "With the fire, my existence is trembling." Hence the fear the shadow has, and the respite the girl sees this as. It is in this zone that we gain very important insight into the girl's fear. She doesn't mind the heat or the light of the fire, because it is inside the building.
The heat is nice. It's inside, so it's nice.
Telling you that the fear is not that of the light, but of the outside. The light simply being an extension of the outside that she fears. Her shadow warns her that the heat of the fire is unsteady and dangerous. The sun is much safer for them. The girl responds that the sun is outside, and the outside is what burns.
The heat is always unsteady. Don't you see the danger here? The sun was much safer.
The sun is outside. That's what burns, the outside.
After leaving the furnace zone, you encounter a metallic land full of robotic lifts and moving spotlights, orderly and precise. The puzzles in this zone show an equal balance of both shadow and girl working in unison. However, throughout this zone, the therapist begins to issue more command-sounding advice to the characters, to which both show an annoyance. The girl especially shows aggression to these, telling him to leave them alone. Shadow notes that it's impressive that a little thing like her could tell off an adult like that. She's impressed by her own confidence and the ability to stand up to things. Yet, the Shadow remarks that this was probably a bad idea, since the therapist only wants to help them. The girl doesn't like the style of advice the therapist gives out, however, interpreting them as commands instead of advice, which only leads to her being aggressive and resisting this help even harder. Her shadow begins to act as a mediator of the two, trying to tell the other what they're both coming from in order to reach an understanding. The therapist is also showing anger after seeing how the girl begins to cut him out of her inner problems, leaving him unable to give her advice. Her shadow continues to try and plead the case of the therapist to the girl, a subconscious desire to get better. Yet the girl doesn't seem to listen and removes the voice of the therapist entirely. This creates a divide between the two characters for the next segment. Throughout the stage, you see a plethora of gears and timepieces scattered about in various stages of disrepair. This aesthetic, paired with the puzzle's mechanic of altering the stage heavily for the shadow, shows the internal disarray that the girl is undergoing. Deep down, she understands that she needs the help of the therapist, but is too stubborn in her ways to accept it. This creates a divide between the girl and her shadow throughout the entire stage. Early on, the shadow confronts the girl about pushing away the therapist's help, even going as far as making all of his advice in this part of the level impossible to hear. The girl becomes upset at this challenge to her decisions and shuts down, wanting to be left alone and even removing herself from puzzles, forcing the shadow, who refuses to leave her behind, to catch up on her own. After finally reuniting with the girl, the voice of the therapist slowly begins to return, showing that the shadow's will to get better is starting to overcome the girl's stubbornness. Soon after they attempt to bridge the gap in their relationship, the shadow worries if they're a burden to the girl, but the girl dismisses this quickly, stating that the shadow is just a bit heavy, but getting heavier, and just a bit loud, but getting louder. This tells the player that the subconsciousness the shadow represents is becoming more and more prominent to the girl, which is a sign of her willingness to improve herself and move past her fear. During these reconstructing levels, the therapist communicates to the shadow through the messages that have been appearing in the background for the entire game, bypassing the mental block the girl has placed on him. The shadow tells the therapist, "You push me, yet she falls apart because of you." Through the constant advice of pushing yourself and trying harder the therapist uses when talking to the girl, showing that even though she doesn't like the tone the messages are delivered to her, the girl still places value on the advice he's given, even having the door of the therapist, shown in the asylum portion of the game, become a reoccurring set piece in the level. The therapist's voice progressively returns during the final segment of this level, no longer stuck with sending messages on walls, yet still faced with a mental block for his words. Certain key points of each message manage to get through to the girl, eventually managing to return the therapist, whose first full message is,
If you've come this far, it must mean that you really, really want my help after all.
He's glad that she managed to overcome her pride and ask for the help she needs. Yet the girl and the shadows still see the therapist as an outsider in their world, and continue to trust each other over him, but still accept his advice so that they can escape. The girl still has some reservations about recovery, claiming that all she needs is more time, which leads to the final puzzle of the stage, a large clock that they must rotate the hands of to free the shadow and progress to the next section. By the time you finally solve the puzzle, the girl has finally had enough time to wait and is finally ready to begin moving forward. As you enter the carnival, one thing is made obvious from the start. This is different from the Mindscape. This area is more structured and concrete than the distorted levels you've previously played in. The shadow asks the girl if this is what she wanted to remember, signifying that this is not a distortion of her reality or an interpretation of her mental struggles, but rather one of the core memories that led to her trauma in some way. This theory is further proven by what seems to be a passing remark to a wooden person fishing in a duck pond, saying that he looks familiar, yet his familiarity would make sense if this is a memory of the girl's trauma. Portions of these painful memories seep into her fantasy world as a constant reminder as to what she's running from, hidden in plain sight from the player until they begin to piece it together. This is what the purpose of these memories is in this portion of the game. This is further proven by the puzzle type in this stage, dealing with the different layers of light. Another type of obstacle that reappears in this stage is the shadow of a dragon, which attempts to chase down the shadow while a group of wooden people sit around and watch, like a shadow puppet performance. During these moments, the girl is trapped in a cage and forced to watch through bars, always behind the group of wooden children. This manifestation of her isolation makes her feel as if she isn't as important as her more confident and brave shadow, and begins to leave her role as leader through the puzzles, instead following behind her shadow. The girl even goes as far as to mention that the wooden people don't see her anymore. Where she once feared their watchful gaze, she no longer finds herself worth watching. There are a few remarks that the girl and Shadow make as they progress through this schoolhouse that lead you to believe the traumatic experience happened here.
I don't remember what I learned. I remember learning, for sure, but I don't know what. I can make it.
I couldn't.
These are all signs pointing to the experience she had that led her to begin isolating herself. The further you venture into the school, however, you realize that the main focus of the background is the vast array of boxes that quickly overtake the memory of school. Boxes that symbolize her memories as a whole, with many of the boxes having labels such as "Before Here," "Good Memories," and "Obligations." It is in this part of the stage that the wooden people you see begin to hide from the shadow, and even actively avoid her if possible. The therapist says that this is because her hard work is showing. The original roles of the two characters have undergone a complete swap. The shadow leading the way confidently and clearly in charge, whereas the girl has become meek and scared, following behind the shadow as it clears the way for her, hardly even needing to assist in the solving of puzzles anymore. The girl begins to fear that her shadow will leave her alone, like everyone else in her life has, and pleads not to leave her, that she can still be of use. This is a sign that the unconscious will to seek help has now become more a conscious thought and goal that both characters wish to achieve together. The girl, however, is scared of having to give up herself in the process, feeling like her shadow is forgetting me in one of those boxes with the rest of the outdated stuff. The therapist says that in order to move forward, you need to accept that fear and her wavering is a part of you. This leads the two characters to look deep within themselves one last time, not as singular entities, but as a whole. At long last, we reach the final act of the game, the section where everything you have learned is put into practice. You appear backstage in some theatrical production, with parts of previous stages scattered about. The two characters work in unanimous synchronicity, even speaking in tandem at times. They no longer sound scared or lost. Instead, they're certain in their actions and how to reach their long-awaited goal of the exit. They work with the therapist, who no longer speaks in harsh commands but in words of confirmation, showing the improvement the characters have undergone in this journey. The shadow says that
There's no threat. No one is looking. Nothing is burning. Everything here is a stage. So we just need to act our way out.
the final obstacle they face is not even a real one, it's one of the mind. By treating it as something simple like a performance, they're lowering the power that fear has over their mind. You can even notice that this stage has very few brambles in it compared to other stages with this hazard. And the brambles this stage does have are small and easily avoided, showing that the trauma and fear are weaker now than it's ever been before. Once the two appear at the stage of this unknown performance, the game reveals one last surprise. One of the wooden people falls to the floor, and the shadow is given an option to possess them. The people the girl had feared for so long are now being seen in a different light for this segment. The shadow possessing the empty dolls is showing that she no longer sees these wooden people as foreign creatures or enemies, but as someone like her, with a little bit of that wavering and fear inside them as well. As the final act begins to take place, the scenes they show are of familiar locations. Each level is a representation of the levels you've already overcome, only this time you see them from behind. You see that they are nothing to fear at all. In these stages, the shadow pilots the dolls around the stage, guiding the girl through its shadows safely, walking between the world of 2D and 3D. All while the therapist tells words of encouragement between and during scenes. The characters have their full trust in the therapist at this point and value his advice and help. In the final scene, the girl is confronted with her fear of the light, with no escape. She falters, yet the shadow is there to empower her. She accepts herself fully and is finally able to move away from her past. As the world comes into view, you see the girl, out in the light of the sun, with her shadow at her feet. She moves over to the swing of a tree that has been with you for countless trials, always in the background, a constant reminder of the trauma and pain you underwent. This is what the tree represents. Her greatest achievement in this game is going to that swing and accepting the past, and moving towards the future, as one.